Well, this is our last of the season. This is our last one, and I only had to say good afternoon once. So, gosh, but please, next time maybe it'll be once even from the beginning. Anyway, it's my personal pleasure and a distinct honor to welcome today's speaker to the podium. I can say without prejudice or exaggeration that he has come the furthest distance of our Shemel speakers this semester. He resides in Bethlehem, and I don't mean Pennsylvania. I mean the Palestinian Authority. He is no stranger to this area, as he has visited on several occasions, one of them when his son Tarek, a cell biologist with a Ph.D. from the University of Colorado, graduated from Misericordia with honors. 3 years ago, he and I co-moderated a roundtable discussion in Bethlehem on the role of the university in strengthening democracy and civil society. Hal Bailey, who I see in the room, was with us. Did you see Hal? Sami Adwan is a professor of education. He taught for many years at Bethlehem University and then was recruited by Hebron University in a high administrative position. Last year, he spent a sabbatical year at a university in Sweden. So I think our crisp weather is not a shock to him. Sami is known internationally for his work with Prime, a foundation he co-founded with the late Dan Bar-On, an Israeli professor at Tel Aviv University, in which they created an educational model that enabled both Palestinian and Israeli educators to create school history curricula that included both historical narratives in one textbook. He has published extensively on the role of education in peace building. Sami is a pioneer in that very important field and an inspiration to others who recognize our interdependence on this planet and find ways of engaging across borders and boundaries. Please welcome him to the podium.
Okay, good afternoon. And thank you, Sandra, for inviting me to this very inspiring gathering after very, delicious lunch and nutritious, which is very good. And yes, I'm happy to be here because I think building on what Sandra was saying and working, I think we live in an interdependence world. And this is also what the education is all about, Our education should be expanded, its aim and objective, from moving to educate generation or the next generation to be living in a close, small proximity to live in this internationally global world. And we need that type of education. It's not anymore a desire, it's a need. There's no way we can succeed to establish an international, global understanding, coexistent peace without trying to educate the next generation to be able to live with multi-perspectivities and enjoying the differences that we have rather than to use these differences as a threatening resources. And it's not an easy process when you deal with education, as it is controlled by usually those people who are sitting in an offices or in places who see the world in different perspectives. That's why we feel there's formulas of bottom-up and top-down approaches, which both has its own advantages and disadvantages. But with all our ability and potential, it's important that to work even in a smaller project that have the potential to create an embryo for changing in the long term to come. I would like to limit my speeches and leave some time for you to question and to comment and to just repeat what I'm trying to say. But still, education is the way forward. If we miss that, if we don't pay enough attention to that, we will end up in more, disastrous or trauma or conflict, whatever. Education is the way forward. This is how I feel. After I Personally, as a Palestinian, I grew up also, as any other Palestinian, under Israeli occupation until 1994. I was a child when 1967 happens, the war. And I lived all my childhood, which I lost part of it, most of it, some of it, as a result of the occupation. But I ended up also in Israeli jails in 1991 because I was active politically in a political ideology. Then before that, personally, I never used to take classes with any Jewish professors during my education in the States, or associate with any even Israelis, because the assumption that all Israelis are the enemy, all Jewish are, is responsible for my trauma. And this is how the conflict actually built this stereotypical dogmatic, views. But when I was in the prisons, there's one turning point that turned my life into another direction. I don't know, it's a more challenging direction actually, which is how really to face the others, let's say the enemy, how really to challenge yourself through working through your own prejudice and dogmatic view and stereotypical view to be able to understand who you are in relation to the other. And that's a very long process. It's a painful process. It's a fearful. It's not a one-way direction. So that's why the most prominent, incident that you can find it in the Just Vision interview, that when I was faced by two Israeli soldiers, one of them, he asked me to sign my indictment in Hebrew, which I refused, and the other soldiers started arguing with each other. He should sign it. But the other soldier said, but how could we force him to sign a statement that he didn't understand the language? For me, when I was sitting inside the cell and looking outside, they look the same to me. But there's a new tuning that starts resonate some way of thinking. And that's when the fearful thing started. We are not the same, they are not the same, there are differences, and that's the important. So I moved to work with education. And I thought, as my profession as a teacher trainers and textbooks and analysis, I thought it's much easier to work with education, but I promise you it's the most challenging one. It's the most difficult one. It's because you have to deal with layers and layers of difficulties and problems. It's not a linear process. It's not smooth ride. It's like working on a nut, eggshells or eggs and minefield. It's not. And how to sustain your energy and how to sustain your ambition to work straightforward in relation to the so many odds that you're living under, it's become much more challenges also and much. So how to energize yourself, how to renew your energy, how to go beyond your immediate reality and to see the perspective after that. How to move from a short terms of action to long term of action. Of course, when you deal with education, it's not like turning off the light, turning on the light. It's, you have to deal with so much layers of challenges. That's why we started a group of Israeli and Palestinian, we started textbooks analysis. And we thought also it's easy to do just this textbooks analysis. And it's fine to do it. And in any society that engage in a protracted and intractable conflict, the story that you read is become part of your social, individual, psychological identity, that you become part of it. You didn't notice that until you are facing with other sets of forms or norms. You don't see it. So when I grew up learning the Jordanian textbooks, for example, I thought, wow, that's fine, that's great. It's taken for granted as if it is. But when you really try to distance yourself and look at it again, you find yourself, we are victims of our own histories. This is the latest research we published with the Professor Danny Bartal. We are victims of our own narrative because what we learn is not really the complete thing. So when we analyzed the Palestinian-Israeli school books at that time, the finding is very basic. We are right, they're wrong, of course. The focus is only in political wars, conflict. We count our victims. We don't consider their victims. We always try to be nice, and always they try to the wrong thing. The peaceful coexistence between, those people who inhabited that area, Jews, Muslim, and Christian, are not existed in both textbooks. This complete denial of geopolitical entity of both sides. There's so I will go into the list of stereotyping, trying to demonization and stereotyping the others in different ways. Of course, it's not obvious sometimes. Sometimes you move from clear, visible stereotype to tacit or implicit, sort of stereotyping. But that's in the end, that's preparing children. That's one result of both sides, with different levels and different, of course, structures to engage and to reinstate and re-invited indirectly to continue the conflict and the war. So here, both education system at this level, with differences in different schools, it's only part of the conflict rather than part of the solution. Of course, both sides, they don't teach about the others. The others as if it's not existed. It's not there. Though they work with each other. Hebrew and Arabic are very Semite language, they close. So much cultural similarities, so much close proximities that if you sneeze in one area, the other guy sneezes you, but still you are not existed in their education system. Because still education system is controlled by politically motivated people who try only to educate children, to continue supporting their political interests, etc. So we started with basic thing. We thought it's very easy. We call it, dual historical approach. What about if the Palestinian start learning part of the Israeli narrative, and we call it narrative, historical narrative. What about if the Israeli children start learning part of the Palestinian historical narrative? What will happen? Is it recognition? Does it move to kind of, I don't want to say legitimacy, does it move to recognitions? Then hopefully in the course of work lead to some kind of, some people, they said conciliation or reconciliation, because in the past, both people, were living very close. So we started with this project, which is, before I enter into this brief description, both textbooks are controlled by both ministries. So you cannot change the textbooks. They are a purgatory responsibility and legitimized only by the ministers. Of course, there's differences in both systems. In the Palestinian system, it's a very centralized system where the ministry could produce the textbooks. In the Israeli side, it's the same, but it's the committee who pre-approved any textbooks is allowed to be used in school systems. Of course, you have school, private school, public school. In the Palestine, they use the same textbooks. In Israel, there's secular states, schools, religious state schools, and ultra-religious state schools. There's difference. So we start with this approach. How can I move this from? Where should I push to move to the second slide? Oh boy, I'm not touching anything. Oh, here. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So, if you cannot change the textbooks from top down, you mean influence both ministries to try to modify how they present themselves and they present the others, what kind of information that you should go to what we call it bottom-up approach. That's why we established the Peace Research Institute in the Middle East, which was established in 1998 by joint Palestinian and Israelis. We try to create symmetries in a context of asymmetry, but we succeeded for certain, level or certain ways. The purpose is very easy. It's to create an opportunity for Palestinian and Israeli educators to be able to try to challenge their animosity, enmity, fear from themselves and from the others. And I mean, when I say that, when I will talk about how the teacher engage in this process, you will find out how it's difficult to challenge what taken for granted assumption or ideology. So we deal with two main projects. I don't know if you're familiar. I mean, in Jewish tradition, family stories plays a very strong role because of the diaspora, the genocide, Also for the Palestinian, family stories stop playing a very significant role, also because of the diaspora and the conflict and traumatization that they went through. So there is two. But we focus on the historical narrative, and we found it's very important to do it in a bottom-up. So that's why we started with this project. I don't want to repeat, but usually in conflict, the histories focus on wars and political conflict. Doesn't include social, cultural, religious type of things. And really, the history and the purpose of history and the agenda has a political agenda. It's just to justify its own action. And history and identity, history is not the past. We always think about history as the past. History is not what the past. It's actually what we are in now and how we think about ourselves and about the others. Even in the current society, we are the production of history, and the historical narrative plays a significant role in that. So that forming the identity of the individual comes that and become part of your, psychological identity, etc. But in history, in conflict especially, there's no chances for multi-perspectivities in schools. It's only one perspective. It's only one perspective. It's the right one, and you should believe in it. There's no way to discuss it. If there's discussions in a classroom of history in relation to certain events, it has to be done within the general boundaries of the purpose of teaching history. So that's why. And there's so much fear from our experiences when we work with teachers, of course, from both sides. There's so much fear to try to challenge that because you are afraid of being accused of selling out, not respecting your ancestor, selling out your national patriotic ideology and also history. And history, it comes with responsibility. That's what fear from us opening our historical, because it comes with so much responsibility. Would I now say that this act that the Palestinian did was wrong? And would I be able to pay the consequences, being not able to be part of the society, being disloyal to, disrespectful for my ancestor? Or what will be the consequences? It's the same thing for an Israeli to think, we destroyed homes, we evacuate Palestinians, we chase them out. It always comes with responsibility. So it's not an easy thing that we think about. But the master historical narrative, usually the dominant one when it comes to teaching history. We are trapped, and everybody trapped, and especially in conflict, we are assuming that there's one history. In reality, there's histories. And histories is a discipline of an ongoing research and discovery. And the more we do that, the more we do that. And there's no end to history as far as there's no one history. There's always history. But being pluralistic in our view in conflict time, this has become a very extremely difficult to believe in and included in a school textbooks. So there is no end to history. And research shows us also there's multi-historical process. Of course, there is historical facts. But how we carry this fact and interpret the fact and put the fact in a context in our language or tradition, that's what makes us different. And I give you many examples when it comes to the Palestinian-Israeli terms. So there's one that's the other assumption was very prevalent and existed. It's the assumption that the other side has one perspective, one narrative. And it's not true. It's the way to make it easier for self to feel that the others has one perspective. But in reality, when you swift a little bit one layer of dust or one paper you shifted, you find there's multi-narrative existed in each society. It depends on the society and the social, political stabilities for a society to allow you to enter into multi-narrative. That's why in the Israeli side, there's a new historiography started in the late 80s. It's still in the Palestinian side, we don't have a new historiography to start with. So that's the assumption. Fact and history, we have facts, but how we look at the facts. I just give you one example that in the first or the second Jewish immigration to Palestine in 1882, there's 2,000 Jewish immigrated. It's Jewish, you can count, you count people. But how it's interpreted in both sides, they're interpreted that there are too few from the Israeli perspective, but from the Palestinian perspective, there are too many. So this is, you can look at any phenomena and say, you can describe that Palestinian, became refugees. That's a story, a phenomenon. But from the Israeli side, they left. We asked them to stay, but they left because they cannot deny people, going outside. They left, we asked them to stay, but they decided to live, so they are taking their own fate. From the Palestinian side, no, they were uprooted, they were, chased out, they were. Other example, which is very prominent, how really a piece of history could change. In August 7th, in December 7th, 1988, there's an Israeli truck driver who ran and killed 4 Palestinian refugees in Rosh LeZion. It's a car accident, if you can take videotape. In the Israeli narrative, they consider it's a traffic road. It happens everywhere. In the Palestinian side, they said, no, it was intentionally done. So look at it, intentionally done, and how you verify this, or just car accident. And that's the start of the first intifada because of this, just a small incident. So, that's how, history, and we look at history from different perspectives. That's why we think about narrative as part of that. Of course, who controls history? There's no question in conflicts, the official, the powerful. And it's not the individual, by the way. And I will tell you another example. Yuli Tamir was Israeli Minister of Education in the late 90s. And she came out with this statement. Why is not the green line on the Israeli maps? The green line that was in 1948. And she was become under extreme difficult pressure from the Israeli education, committee member, and she couldn't dare to move forward. It's the same thing with the Palestinian Minister of Education, Lamis Al-Alami, in 2008 or 7. She said, we want to teach your booklet in schools, which they teach the Israeli narrative to Palestinian school, which is way far ahead from others. And she became under extreme attack that she has to come later on, deny that she signed an agreement to use this book. So sometimes it's not the individual, the person, it's the system that's really a problem. So in time of conflict, this is the purpose of history, to stay in the conflict, to justify self-wrongdoing, or guard more support for any political action, remain united, guard interest and ideology, keep accusing the other side for not ending the conflict and for the wrongdoing. So that's basically what I've been repeated. We are the victims, they are the victimized, we the good, they are the bad, and it goes back and forth. Our heroes, our minister, their heroes, our minister, and their heroes, our ministers, terrorists, gangs, whatever the names that's gone. So this is kind of pictures of black and white, right and wrong, and it's not gonna, work hard. And the most difficult thing, it's not what the content of the textbooks are, it's how the teachers are trained to deal with them. So the teachers are trained to be able to inoculate or to transfer this knowledge to the pupils. So there's teachers, both sides are well educated to teach their own historical narrative, but to teach the multi-narrative, multi-perspective of history, And the other side narrative, it's another level of challenge that you really feel they're facing. That's why when we enter into our project, we recruited Palestinian and Israeli teachers, school teachers. We started with 6 from both sides. We end up with 24 from each side. But it's a process that we have to retrain the teachers. You have to help the teacher dislodge how they are trained, their role, and how they see the material. And that's important, by the way, which is, Paulo Freire wrote about it, how to move teacher from consumer of knowledge to producer of knowledge. Because we continue dealing with teachers as consumer of knowledge. You know, I write what you want to say, and you can say it the way I want to, and you don't. And if there's anything to be discussed, has to be in the line and the context of this legitimized text. You cannot. And there's also layers of, walls that run. So how to deal with that? So that's why we recruited Palestinian and Israeli teachers. Both ministries, they refuse our project up front, I'm telling you. They've refused its initiation, they refused its process. They didn't accept our booklet after we published, for reasons everybody has. So that's why we recruited teachers through mouth to ear, through personal contact, which is fine. There's nothing, because there's no official approval of such things, and they think we are invading their territory, as if it is, there. Bottom up, top down, these formulas of change always comes. Both sides has to be, both formulas, it's better to be synchronized, but you cannot do that in a politically conflict area. It's hard to attract politicals. If you ask Fatah people, the PNA, to do it, oh, yeah. If you ask them why you don't teach about the Holocaust, they will give you many examples. If you ask the Israeli why you don't teach about the Palestinian culture, they give you many, because, this. So that's why it's starting from bottom up. It's much grounded. It's a slow process. It's difficult. You lack support of official support. You lack sometimes financial support, but at the same time, you do it. And thanks for Oslo Agreement from 1993 to 2000 that allowed so many Palestinian and Israelis to meet together in different places, location, what they call it, people-to-people project, to allow such project to be, seeing the light. We looked at the formula of how Europeans look at their history, especially Germany, Polish, and France, because they have problems dealing with the school books. Still, it's very debatable. It's very, challenging how to write history. And if you look at South Korea, North Korea, Japan, China, still it's really a hot, discussable topics that you don't know where it's leading. So we were figuring out with our teacher how to do this. Should we go with what we call it bridging, one narrative, one joint narrative that represent both sides? Of course, that's one option. Or bridging narrative, we take from part of this and put it together like mosaic, and both has its own challenges. And we settle with dual historical narrative, because we want the Israeli and the Palestinian to be able to read the other side narrative as they are narrating their history in their own community. Of course, it has its own challenges, because it's very hard, to hear about the others, how they look at, how they, describe you, let's say, in history. But you have to do it in the hard way. You have to bring your guts out to be able to realize and, hopefully develop some sort of understanding, sympathy, reconciliation, relatedness. As one Quaker, peace builder, she said the enemy is the one that you didn't read their story or his or her story yet. So we settled with dual historical narrative, basically because prime at that stage, we were settled for what they call a two-state solution. Now we come back to these issues, hopefully, is it two-state solution, one-state solution, one state, community, whatever. Now it's a new proposal for the state. So we thought maybe we'll just ask the teachers to write jointly and separately, to write their, historical narrative. The big challenge is when you are in fight with your neighbor, and we have lawyers here, I think. Usual, I don't know, I recognize 2 lawyers, maybe there's many lawyers. When you try to ask where to start, each side will start from a point that he is right, he's strong, and he doesn't show his faults. So the competing discussion between the teacher, how to start, with what topic to start, is very important. Because it's like, making gains, scoring points. I will start with this, you start with this. So we went through so much processes to be able to decide where to start and how to start. But one basic thing we made it clear, there's no way that there's no intention, or there's no way we intended to legitimize or delegitimize each other's narrative. It's only thing to present your narrative as it's narrated in your society. And we don't want to weigh them, we don't want to evaluate them or value them, but just present your stories. And the most difficult thing is to promise the teachers that we will include whatever they write, because they are afraid that we modify, because we have so many layers of history narrative. Something we keep it inside ourselves, something we can share it with our spouses, something we can share it with our professional colleague, something we can share it in the public. So when you bring this, level of historical from inside out, is so much fearful. What will be done with it, how it will be dealt with. So it didn't mean that each side would start delegitimizing his own or her own narrative, or legitimizing the other side narrative. And it's basically to know and to recognize these different narratives that exist. So this is the cover of the booklet, which is very, very stereotypical. If you look at it, very stereotypical. And when we were asked, why we did that, we said, okay, this is how in conflict people look at each other in stereotype. You look at, this is the image of a Jewish person, this is an image of Palestinian. They are both constrained by the fence around them, and the favorite Israeli colors is blue, the favorite Palestinian color is green, so how you deal with these issues. So you have to be present, and this is actually that they're turning back to each other. They existed, but they don't have recognition to that. But before we're jumping into the content, they start to write, this is about the first 3 narratives: Balfour Declaration, 1948 war, and 1987 First Palestinian Intifada. And they decided together, the teachers would start. And every topic, so every event has valuable importance in their own historical narrative. Balfour, first recognition of a powerful country for the Jewish to have their land in Palestine, a promised land, etc. For the Palestinian, is considered a turning point in international conspiracy between colonial British and a Zionist ideology. And both turning points, it's really important. 48 is the same. Year of independence, dreams came true. Years of wars of catastrophe where dreams has been vanished. The first Palestinian Intifada from the Palestinian side. It's the first time in history, I'm sure you are aware of history much, that we were spoken on our behalf by all Arab countries and political leaders. And we are really subjected to all kind of denial of presenting our national interests, regardless of how you evaluate the role of the Arab world and political leaders. But as a Palestinian, they didn't work in our benefits. I would just leave it like this and leave it for you to follow that side. And this is the first moment that Palestinians move together and they start speaking out their own political agenda. We want to be free. We don't want to be continuing under occupation. From the Israeli side, so it's called uprising. Uprising is a very positive term when you start rising up with all your strength together, women, children, old, young, etc. From the Israeli side, it's considered a denial of whatever generosity the Israelis offering, jobs, roads, health care to the Palestinian. And these people, they are not appreciative. They start calling it right, violent, etc. So that's how the inner side of the book looks like. And we started with the assumption there's no one history, there's history. So how we do that? Should we claim that this, whatever 1967 war, or 6-day war, is it aggression or preemptive war? That's another issue. Is it the only, does it represent the whole Palestinian narrative and the whole Israeli narrative? Should we close history as historians, most of historians does, or should we open it for discussion? That's why our lifesaver and successful pedagogical approach is to have the empty space in between. And it's relieved us from so many questions. If you read this and you feel that's not complete, okay, you can write your own, add it, modify it, play with it. Something you don't take for granted. So that's the ideas of that. The process of engaging here is very painful. It's not uneasy, though we have committed teachers to be able to sustain the burden of the second intifada, because we started in 2000, and they went through personal, psychological development. Not all the teachers continue with us. Some of the teachers, they drop out of the way for different reasons. Psychological reason, professional reason, family reason, etc. But at least we would like to engage them in that. So the process, crying, arguing, discussing, fighting, withdrawing, is always the case. It's not easy. And we feel that teachers are very challenging by the situation of trying to deal with some historical facts. And I can give one example that an Israeli teacher asked the Palestinian, an Israeli teacher asked the Palestinian, can't you change the definition of Zionism? He said, if it's up to me, I can do that, but I have to go around 8 million Palestinians if they agree with me. So, and that shows how the challenge. The other challenges also raised by Israeli teachers. Can't you distinguish between settlements and localities? Do you describe settlements as those settlements that were built in 1967 and consider as colonies or settlements? Distinguish them from those cities near Haifa or Tel Aviv, etc. So these are very sensitive issues, but it creates a lot of discussions. It's the same thing, when the Palestinians ask the Israeli, can't you, recognize that you expelled the Palestinian, you destroy countries? Can't you recognize Dalit plan Dalit, that was, approved by Ben Gurion to expel Palestinians who are in the right? So this competition that creates discussions, and with the growth, the Israeli said, can't you reduce the number of enemies when your narrative? Because always there are enemies, vice versa. So to create a lot of, develop, yeah. So this emotion, crying, withdrawing, but it's part of the process. One thing is to hear a description of yourself by the others through discussions. That's one level. The second level is challenging, is to read the other side narrative in your language. It has much more influence. The third thing is to be able to carry this narrative and try to teach it in your classrooms. That's another way level. So we got those teachers committed, continue with us, hopefully that they produce something. And we were recognized by the United Nations and by UNESCO by creating the dual historical narrative approach to teach history. And we don't know how far it's gone. Classroom experience is another big challenge. Some pupils, they said, how do you teach us the enemy or the other side narrative? Do you believe in their narrative? Our narrative is right, their narrative is propaganda. Our narrative is legitimate, their narrative is, counterfeiting whatever history. It's not true. So how do you deal with the reaction of pupils? Other pupils said, oh, it's nice now we know how they think, what they think. It's now we can describe why they behave that way or this way. So it's kind of that. And some of them said, okay, I enjoy reading about the other side, and could we be able to meet with each other? Priorly, we designed that both schools to meet to each other, but we couldn't do that. What's interesting, and I spoke with this morning with Luis, if we predict the outcome of the objective of any project or any plan, it's become very traditional and limited. But sometimes we didn't expect that the discussion that was created in a classroom by introducing the other side would be carried back to the homes. So children start coming home. Oh, you told us this, but now we learn this. Where's the truth? Are you lying at us, or are they lying at us? So they start discussion back and forth in the community. And it's important to engage parents, by the way. Because a lot of dogmatism sometimes, not in schools, but sometimes it's situated in the family. So that's also, some parents, they reject it and they complain about school, don't dare to teach our children the other side narrative. Some parents came and visited school and enjoyed it. Some of them even, they gave support for such project food. So, and that represents the societies in general. Before moving and closing, both ministries refused to accept our proposal. From the Israeli side, they didn't like it. They didn't want it. They would say you in a very political nice term, it didn't go through the process of approving, textbooks. And what's the process? It's censorship, And the pressure on the Israeli side came from the Ministry of Education. Though internal discussion, as we heard, came to us that it's a nice project, but it's too soon. Should be later on. I don't know what's later on. What's the proper time to do what? In the Palestinian side, mostly came from political groups, from Hamas or right or left. So it became from social pressure. And accusing teacher of normalization, inviting the enemy narrative, giving the enemy narrative a stand in your school. So, and that's expected. It's not. But when we published the first book, we thought, oh, it's a successful failure or failure success, as my colleague, Professor Yanavi, Israeli co-director and co-founder, loves to say this, either successful failure or failure success. And why is that? Because we produced something, but we failed to get it accepted. And, so we failed, but we succeed. But we failed, but succeed. So teacher training, retraining teacher, developing a model become. And to our surprise, the international community welcomed this initiative very much. And the first booklet translated to Italy, followed by French. Of course, it was existed origin in Arabic and Hebrew and English, and in Spanish, German, Swedish nowadays, and become much more attractive to international. And when we ask, that's also the theory of proximity, And when we ask the European, why you are interested in that? Said, oh, because we have material now, we present both sides, approved by both sides. So we will not be criticized of taking either this side or accused of anti-Semitic, etc. But when, Catalan now, it's a new story, Catalan now to be separated from Spain, it's big issues. So when we asked how they did it in Catalan area in Barcelona, they said, oh, that's nice. We divided the group into 3 groups, one Palestinian group, one Israeli group, one represent Balfour, and we taught Balfour through mockery trial, and it was very nice. We produced video, etc., etc. It's enjoyable. We pupils learn everything about it, from the Israeli side, from the British side, from the Palestinian side. But when they stopped teaching about Balfour, they went to teach their history in the same way before. And one student asked the teacher, can't we learn our history the same way? It is, yeah. When you come close to what you are, you become much more responsible. So that's why. We won a few prizes. We think we publish it in many languages. It's become a model for educational development. And it's not we used to call it peace building project, but now it's an educational reform. Why is reform? Because what material to use, what a criteria to select, how teaching should be done, what's the overall outcome that you expected. That's why. But it's possible to teach it, of course. So, but with big assumption that we avoid multi-perspectivity and multi-narrative that exists, but we lived with it, but we don't recognize it. We won so many prizes of that. We feel also accused in both our society that we did something that should not be done at this time. We should wait still. And my further research, still both Palestinian and Israeli school books need to be focused again on, to be really able to present a future than the past. And I would say that we cannot see the future until we really look critically at our historical narrative and what we understand, how we see us and the other self. And the problem, I think, I met a colleague from Australia, and that came from that. History teaching, it's not a dry subject, it comes with emotion. How to deal with emotion is very important, and still we cannot, we couldn't develop, I'm sorry. We couldn't develop a formula how to deal with emotion when you try to teach about history. If you teach about, let's say, 1948 war, is it independence war, or it's the catastrophe war, how to deal with the emotion that arise after that, how to deal with that, how to teach. How much teachers engage emotionally at the level of empathy or sympathy in a certain way. And this is something has to be explored also in the future. Okay. Always teachers need to be empowered. Unfortunately, in conflict situation, they are very vulnerable to criticism. This is important to say. This, you remember the first cover? And after you learn things, I mean, not the whole story about the other, and you cross your culture, your history, your politics, and you try to reach others, it's one thing, it's individually decision, but always you are limited with constraints that imposed by you by reality, you know. And this, now we change this cover, we use this cover, and it has very symbolic meaning. First, two sides, when they learn each other, they try to stretch together toward each other's, but still they are limited in their own constraint. The trees, which represent olive trees, still represent the futures, but still they are interwoven, their branches, but still individual cannot reach. I just want to end up with this kind, if you would like to learn, just a glimpse of how Balfour Declaration has been from both sides. I don't know how much time do you need to read this, but I can leave the PowerPoint with Sandra. Maybe she can upload it somehow and you look at it. It's basically how Balfour seen by the Israeli, by the Palestinian side, and a recognition, great as a startup, but later on, it used to be part of the Israeli narrative. Now it's been diminished a little bit. From the Palestinians, still plays a very significant role, and still it's a Memorial Day. British mandates, how it's been seen from both sides, and this is excerpt from the book, how it could be seen. So it's like controversial oppositions. And when the book was published by the New Press in 2011, it's available now in English, the full book. The New Press has more vision to the, And they changed the title, called Parallel Histories, Side by Side, Israel and Palestine. And the full book is available in German, Arabic, and Hebrew, and it's been in the process of being translated to Swedish. This is places and maps, still complete denial from both sides. The geopolitical situation does not exist in either side, you know. Palestinian refugees, they are ran away, left. Israeli narrative. Palestinian, they were expelled, uprooted, still there. It's called 1948 Wars, the neutral term, Year of Independence, with happiness, jubilee, joy, victory, and Nakba, catastrophe and disaster, and defeating. Role of Arab countries, it's very important, you know. The Israeli in their net fought and defeated 5 different Arab armies in 48, defending themselves always, you know. Israeli accepted the UN resolution 181. Oh, they didn't. They did, sorry. It's a big mistake here. They didn't, they did accept. The Palestinian, since World War II, resisting the conspiracy. I mean conspiracy, I dare not to mention by whom. Defending our lands. Arab armies came too late, too little, lack of weapons and plans, only to serve their interests, were under foreign control. Palestinian people left alone to their destiny, did not accept UN Resolution 181. In 1967 war, it's a preemptive war as it's been described by the Israeli narrative. It's aggression war described by the Palestinian narrative, which end up in occupying. The first Palestinian Intifada was not expected, just a traffic lights, traffic accident. Also not expected by the Palestinians, even the PLO did not, and the Shin Bet and the Mossad, Israeli security, they didn't expect that Intifada would start. They start realizing it happens after 2-3 months. What's going on? Who's behind that, etc. So both sides, they didn't expect it, but you know, it's not traffic lights, intended traffic lights, intended traffic accident. Oslo Accord from the Israeli side, reduce violent attack on Israelis, negotiation, marathon, frustration. Palestinian, it's a mean, should be considered as mean to end occupation, establishing the Palestinian state, and also have so much frustration. I leave it up to you to think about it, not today, maybe in the future. What's the future solution? How it's been seen by the Palestinian Israelis? We don't know. There's Trump, they call it century peace deals. I don't know what's the called. We don't know. Something is going on, we don't know. So we don't know how the Palestinian Israeli will be able, how they see the future. There's a 2-state solution. Is it viable, valid, possible? 1-state solution, is it the same, viable, acceptable? 1-state solution to nationality. Netanyahu produced the other day a Palestinian state without borders. So it's, I don't know where it is. For Palestinian, most of them, they would like to have 2-state solution. Now it's strong movement among the Palestinian side to have 1-state solution with equal rights, I mean voting, etc. The Israeli, of course, they look for a state for Jewish, a Jewish state. If it created a 1-state solution, would it be apartheid states like South Africa? How much they maintain minority, majority? It's like Tibi, he's one Israeli Minister of Education. We look for a 1-state solution, so the next prime minister will be a Palestinian. So there's a lot of speculation, how is the futures. I will end up here, and thank you for listening. So I'm open for comments, criticism, questions, as much as I can. If I don't answer them all, maybe next time I will answer them all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Adwan, for your work and for coming here. I have a couple questions, so I'll state them quickly. As you know, there's so much less people-to-people interaction now between Palestinians and Israelis. So how would you compare where we are now with when you began your work? One of the barriers that we see is that there is a movement right now to potentially close the PLO office in Washington, D.C., which would create no Palestinian voice in the U.S. And then lastly, we've been doing our own political dialogue because of how increasingly American society is becoming bifurcated between political identities. So I wonder how you might help us.
I think with the increase of political tensions, maybe we are coming as Palestinians to the neck of bottlenecks. It's about to decide really where to go. It's not anymore trying to negotiate and renegotiate. Nowadays, I called 1993 to 2000 the peace, 7 peace era years, where really both sides really craving, looking for each other in a process of humanization, recognition, working together, building future, foreseeing. Now it's been disappeared because there's too much waiting, that nothing really on the ground happening, for different reasons. I don't want to name them. Building the wall on the Israeli side really create a strong barriers between both sides to stretch out and hear and look at each other and feel each other and smell each other's. It's become very difficult. From the Palestinian side, there's the increased pressure of the boycott BDS movement, which is creating a lot of challenges and difficulties. Try to build a coexistent, relation between Palestinians and Israelis. I think the fear and the speculation and it's becoming again more and more slowly but surely. Trusting the other side intention is a very important issue. I don't think that both sides really feel that the intention of the other side is genuine, and they don't believe in that. That's a questioning of intentionality, etc. I think I don't want to blame both sides at the same level because we are still Palestinian under occupation. We have limited freedom of movement. We are controlled. We are searched. Houses being destroyed every day. It's not comparison, but I'm trying, to present. There's roadblocks. There's killing every day. Confiscation of land, controlling the water. You name it. That's one thing. It's very prevalent. What make Hamas strong? I'm just before going to this closing with the PLO office. What made Hamas strong? It's our stupidity. Regardless of who will be in office, they were elected, democratically elected, approved and validated by international observers. They won. So I think the wise thing is to give them a floor to run the 4 years and to see how much they will do. Will they become much more, strict or much more liberal way of thinking and dealing with the situation? That's the biggest problem I think we are suffering as Palestinians per se. First, because we deny the result of a complete democratic voting. So I would say now, transferring to the issue, I think the American policy should continue to present themselves as a neutral as much as they can. They're not a neutral. From the Palestinian side, they are one-sided. There's one-sided by the Israeli, policy. That's, But by closing also the PLO office, it will increase and reinstate that we told you the Americans are not bi-sided. They are one-sided. They are, we go further to analyze that even the American policy are so much, developed or prepared or addressed as the Israeli leadership wants them. It's like not giving the Palestinian families their support because their sons or daughters, engage in struggle or conflict or resistance. So I wouldn't say it would serve in the long term. In the contrary, if there's some proposal coming from the state with trying to twist the Palestinian hand, we are very weak. We cannot compare ourselves to the Israelis and to the American in strength. It will create a lot of animosity among the Palestinians. I would say it's better to keep it open. It's better to engage with discussion. It's not, I think it's not imposing resolution, it's creating together resolution. By closing the PLO offices, I think it will not make the political solution or influence American in a much better way or easier way. In the contrary, it will create a lot of Palestinians to resist, and also already start demonstration and talking about the American intervention in the Middle East. And that's one evidence. They will take it as evidence in their hand. The last one, I think, I don't know. I don't know, you have much trouble than we are now. I know it's very, it's a conjectures of how the American policy do, and I don't want to say much about it, but I think you have to engage the public, you have to engage the media, you have to engage to bring this. You have lawyers, you have doctors, you have to engage in that level, and try to present it in a way not to create animosity and enmity for the others. It's just to present it as it's good for all American, not for just one party rather than the others. I will try to be careful with this. Yes?
Well, is there any single book by a professional historian, Israeli, Palestinian, or American, that might, for example, be here in our library, that you could point to as the best that exists now as far as being an objective history that could come as close as possible to being accepted by Israeli and Palestinians?
Well, I think I would say even from the Israeli side, it's much more progressive, to be honest, than the Palestinian side. It's been when it comes to historiography. I would say Benny Morris books. It's very, if you read Benny Morris in early 90s, it's different. He's different than in now. I would, but if you want to go to more, challenging, history. Ilan Pappé books are very pro-Palestinian, though, and very challenging. It's, Nurit Pellet wrote nice books also, but it's very extreme. Avi Shlaim, there's Israeli also authors, wrote a few books, and oh my God. In the Palestinian side, I can look and find out, because as I finished analyzing Palestinian Israeli school books, that's why I came close to these people.
Rashid Khalidi?
Huh?
Rashid Khalidi?
Oh, Rashid al-Khalidi. Oh, Rashid al-Khalidi, yes. I don't know what's his latest book is. Did he write recently, or he has written in 70s and 80s? I don't know if he writes an updated kind of historical recount. Rashid al-Khalidi, that's a book that you can, yeah. Thank you.
Are you familiar with the work of Thomas Mann and Norman Ornstein?
No, unfortunately.
Well, in this country, which is not your emphasis here, over the past 10 years, they have written the most authoritative book on the politics, the history, the political science of what's going on, Republicans as to Democrats. It's entitled, It's Even Worse Than It Looks, 2012. And the chief concept that they bring up, which applies to so much of this, is false equivalence. Are you familiar with that concept? Because it's all through what you were talking about. The biggest false equivalence over the past 10 years that they note, and Thomas Mann is slightly left of center, Norman Ornstein's decidedly right of center, but they both agree that Democrats aren't just as bad as Republicans. That's false equivalence. And it fits to a lot of what you're talking about, Palestinians to Israelis, back and forth, false equivalence.
I will be able, hopefully I will have a chance to look at these authors. Okay, I will comment later.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sami, as you and your collaborator were writing this book, what was the reaction of at three levels, your fellow colleagues, your administration, and the governing bodies of the governing bodies of the Palestinians and the Israelis?
Okay.
And has that changed as a result of the utilization of the book?
Yes. In relation to, colleagues, you find different opinions. And before, if you ask me, before 2006, 2007, there was much more leaning to relate and accept and appraise such work among colleagues. After the start with the PDS and normalization concepts, many voices has been disappeared. Very few people, they tell you one-to-one, oh, that's nice, but if they cannot come on the table and say it. In the administration, if you look at the university's administration, I think the Palestinian Ministry of Education took a decisions, I think in 2008 or 2007, even before, that such work is not allowed and not acceptable. That's why we're not doing that under the umbrella of any university. That's why I had to resign in 2014 from Bethlehem University and go to Hebron University, because we're under pressure, how normalization this be, and that's why. In the government, I would say this. The Palestinian government, they don't say anything. They don't object, but they don't support. They don't announce their support, but they don't object. Even Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, he created a special committee to engage and communicate with the Israeli civil society. So, they don't. And they took my books, all of these books. In the Israeli side, even in the Israeli side nowadays, you have, if you work with a Palestinian, you could be listed in what you call it blacklist. So that's become also limiting. But it's more in the Palestinian side than in the Israeli side. So you can be in the blacklist, so you can be avoided or criticized, or being stereotyped or being limited opportunity. I lost, and I'm not feel sorry. I have so many opportunities because in the Palestinian Authority, because my work with my Israeli colleagues. So you have to pay price. So in the Israeli government, they announced they rejected from Gideon Sa'ar at that time. So was the Israeli Minister of Education, to Bennett nowadays, which is extreme. Even Bennett nowadays, he's not allowing even Israeli civil society to work in schools like B'Tselem and others. So it's not, you have different kind of, positions. When I invited Palestinian colleagues to engage with me, very few of them accepted to be part of this or affiliated by that, because they're afraid of being stereotyped, stigmatized, accused, whatever. In the Israeli side is much easier, but still a lot of Israelis, like I'm inviting now Israeli colleagues to do school books analysis. because this accusation and battlefield between Palestinian and Israeli in relation to school books is still alive. The claim, the assumption, Israeli teach peace, Palestinian don't teach peace, all this, well. So I tried to invite two Israeli colleagues to be engaged in this, and I said, no, we cannot do that. I'm sorry, we cannot do that. Because they don't want to stick their heads out and put them in a position to be, criticized. The third one accepted, for example. In the Palestinian side, it's hard to find even a partner. So, and I think it's like barometer goes up and down. It's not stable all the time. If there's a hope that will be peace, there will be something moving, you get more people voices with you. If we're going the other direction, people can't disappear from you, and you feel yourself alone. You look around, nobody's here. Yeah, I didn't understand false. You said false equality, equivalence. Is that? You said false equivalent, and that's do you mean that applies to both sides or only one side? Okay, thank you. That's what I mean.
I think it even applies at times to Democrats as well.
Yes, and applies to Palestinian and Israeli also the same level.
Decidedly, Republicans are more guilty.
Okay, okay.
We have one more question, and you have a question.
Thank you so much, Professor. This is indeed beautiful. I've appreciated your coming, and you've addressed one of the key things that I also wish to address one time in future. From the Democratic Republic of Congo, and in the east of this country, we have this conflict that is between the Rwandans and the Congolese. And also in Rwanda itself, there is this conflict that still continues up to today, the difference between the Hutus and the Tutsis.
Yes.
And we find that this was just a manufactured thing. This is not a fact. People made it up, and we now have records. People have written books explaining the differences between the Tutsi Rwandese and the Hutu Rwandese. But this did not exist in their histories, like way back, where they had the monarchy, which was ruled by the Tutsis, and the Tutsis lived in harmony with the Hutus. And this conflict, which one time I was talking to a UN official who told me that they call it natural hatred, implying it's deeply embedded in their DNA, but it's not a fact. It's not a fact, so we have to address this. And again, you've said you have fears. For example, you would be under attack for having told the truth or trying to reconcile both sides. So what gives you the strength to do this? That's one question. And again, how safe are you? Is there like a resolution? Is there like an act from both sides of from both governments that protects you guys from the work you're doing? Because it's really great. Thank you.
I think there we have just short answer to the. I think sometimes we are trapped by certain formula or jargon or terminology that been imposed in different areas, and it's been taken for granted and it's been used. I will tell you just one example. There's always the word Islam terrorism, and we use it. But I was challenged. But you can say Muslim terrorist. I agree with that. You Muslim, you are terrorist. Okay, But you don't convey that with Islam, for example. So there's a lot of terminology that we use that's national hatred, whatever. But it's imposed and be jargonized, being media created carefully, nicely, and become a de facto. Like this one, anti-Semites. We Palestinian Semite people too. I don't know. We are. So how could we, be against ourselves? That's one thing. I think the driving forces is one thing. As an educator and teacher trainer, I would like the education system to be able to be part of a peaceful solution than to continue perpetuating the conflicts. And I think this is not challenging to the Palestinian and Israelis, it's challenging to the American teacher, to the European teacher. Last year I spent 1 year in Sweden. It's not better than American is not better than Palestinian Israelis. And when we ask them, can't you talk about multi-perspective? That's one thing. I think education should be a means to empower people, to emancipate people, rather than to indoctrinize people and to create a homogeneous generation who can eat and drink and sleep like any herds of animals. I'm sorry for the term. But it's still education, it's a liberation process. For me as a Palestinian, I want to protect my children and my grandchildren. I have maybe 7, we counted 7. Yeah, I want them to live live in peacefully, as well as the Israeli children to be able to enjoy their childhood. There's an energy that comes from a humanistic perspective or from a philosophical perspective, but why don't we live in peace? Why don't we enjoy life? Why? Why don't we cherish the past and the future? Why should it be always filled with hate? How much hate that destroys self and the others, instead of love that really bring us together. And that's my motivation. And I didn't learn it the easy way. I spent, I don't know how many years when I changed my way of thinking. With that simple incident, are the Israelis the same? No, they are not the same. Are Jewish the same? No. And also I want the Israelis to say, the Palestinians are not the same. We have different views. The Americans are not the same. So to create an educational for peace and education for empowering emancipation, interdependence. That's what you, Sandra, has created, which is very powerful. That's my...
Well, thank you. Thank you, Sami. This is not an easy subject. The answers aren't just forthcoming, but we'll keep trying. We'll remember about interdependence, and someday we'll get along together better, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I would love to do that.